The old veteran's heart pounded in his chest as he sat alone on the park bench. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the landscape. The park, usually bustling with families and joggers, had begun to empty out. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the nearby trees. But despite the calm, a strange sense of unease crept over him. He was used to the solitude. For years, the park had been his refuge, a place where he could sit quietly, reminisce about old times, and watch the world go by. He had earned his peace after decades of service, surviving wars, losses, and the kind of horrors that most people couldn't imagine. But tonight was different. Tonight, the stillness felt suffocating. It was as though someone, was watching him. He adjusted the worn leather jacket that had seen better days, the fabric faded and scratched from years of use. His hands, though trembling slightly, still had the strength of someone who had spent a lifetime in battle. He had lived through hell, but even the veteran's steely resolve couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was on the horizon. Suddenly, he heard the sound of laughter. It was sharp, loud, and full of mockery. His head turned instinctively, and his eyes locked onto a group of young men approaching from the path. There were 5 of them, their faces full of confidence, each one carrying the arrogance that only youth could bring. They wore hoodies and baggy jeans, their movements casual, yet there was an underlying tension in the way they walked. It didn't take long for the veteran to sense that these weren't just regular young men enjoying a day at the park, they were trouble. The group slowed as they reached the bench, their eyes scanning the veteran. One of them, a tall, wiry figure with a sneer on his face, stopped in front of the old man. "Hey, old man," the young man said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What are you doing here? This park isn't for fossils like you." The veteran's grip tightened on the armrest of the bench, but he didn't respond. He knew better than to engage in meaningless banter with people who clearly wanted a confrontation. Instead, he stared ahead, trying to remain calm. Another of the young men, shorter but stockier, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "What's the matter, old man? Can't hear us? You must be deaf by now. Too many years on the battlefield, huh?" The other 3 boys joined in, chuckling and exchanging looks. Their voices grew louder, full of cruel humor. It was clear they enjoyed the power they felt over the elderly man. The veteran's eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. He had been through much worse. He had seen soldiers fall beside him, had survived ambushes and gunfire, had faced death head-on. These boys were just annoying pests, nothing more. But still, he felt the stirrings of anger, a familiar rage building deep within him. He wasn't going to let them disrespect him, not in his own territory. "Leave me alone," he muttered quietly, his voice gravelly from years of smoking and shouting orders on the battlefield. The words seemed to fuel the boys even more. They circled around him now, like vultures eyeing their prey. The leader, the tall one, stepped even closer, his breath hot against the veteran's ear. "You heard him, guys. He's got a little fire in him. Maybe he thinks he can still fight," he said mockingly, eyes gleaming with amusement. He shoved the veteran in the shoulder. The old man barely moved, but the shove was enough to make him lose his balance. Without thinking, the veteran's body instinctively reacted. He grabbed the arm of the young man who had pushed him and twisted it with a quick, precise motion. A sharp gasp escaped the young man's lips as the veteran effortlessly disarmed him, twisting his arm behind his back. The rest of the group froze, their faces shifting from amusement to confusion. The veteran's grip tightened, just enough to let them know he wasn't just some old man to be pushed around. "Don't make this a mistake, kid," the veteran said, his voice low and steady. "You don't want to mess with someone who's seen things you can't even begin to imagine." For a brief moment, the group seemed to hesitate, unsure of how to proceed. They had underestimated him, thought him weak, but now they saw that he wasn't as helpless as they had thought. But the leader, the tall one, wasn't backing down. With a snarl, he yanked free from the veteran's grip, stumbling backward. "You think you can scare me, old man? I've got no fear of you. You're nothing but a relic from a past we don't need." The word stung, but the veteran remained calm. He had heard worse in his life. He had stared death in the face and kept moving. But then, something shifted. The tall young man's eyes flickered to the others, signaling them to move in closer. Without warning, one of the other boys lunged forward, shoving the veteran hard in the chest. He lost his balance and stumbled backward, falling onto the cold concrete path. Pain shot through his body as his spine hit the ground. His breath came in short gasps. He was older now, his joints weren't what they used to be. It wasn't just the fall that hurt, it was the feeling of helplessness, the realization that he was vulnerable in a way he hadn't been before. The young men laughed, their voices echoing in the park. The veteran lay there for a moment, stunned, trying to gather his bearings. His mind raced, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had survived so much, fought in wars, seen the worst of humanity, and yet, here he was, beaten and humiliated by a bunch of kids. But then, something inside him clicked. He wasn't done. Not yet. With a grunt, the veteran pushed himself off the ground, his hands shaking with both anger and pain. He wasn't going to let these punks have the satisfaction of seeing him stay down. As he stood, he noticed something that gave him hope. In his pocket, the outline of his phone pressed against his leg. His fingers fumbled as he pulled it out, still a little shaky from the fall. He knew who to call. He always knew who to call when things got bad. His biker friends, veterans like him, a brotherhood forged through shared experiences. They would come for him. And when they did, these boys would wish they'd never crossed paths with an old soldier. The group of young men was still laughing, not realizing the mistake they had made. The veteran's finger hovered over the screen of his phone. He dialed a number, his hand steady despite the pain. "Yeah?" The voice on the other end was gruff, familiar. A voice that had been there during the hardest moments of his life. "What's up?" "I need backup," the veteran said, his voice calm but firm. "There's trouble at the park. I'm going to need all of you here. Now." He didn't wait for a response, knowing that his friends would understand. The veteran hung up and turned his gaze back to the group of young men. "Enough games," he said, his voice cold. The young men stopped, the teasing expressions on their faces slowly fading. They weren't sure what was going on, but something in the veteran's demeanor had shifted. They didn't know it yet, but the tables were about to turn. The veteran stood, his body still aching from the fall. He glanced around, his gaze steely. The young men were now hesitant, unsure of how to proceed. One of them, the leader, had stopped laughing, his expression shifting from smug to something more guarded. The veteran could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They were beginning to realize they had pushed him too far. But it was too late for them to back down now. The veteran's mind raced, but his body was steady. He had been in far worse situations. The biker friends he had called weren't far. They were his brothers, his comrades. Once they arrived, everything would change. But for now, the group of young men was still circling him. The leader took a step forward, trying to act tough, but the veteran saw through it. The arrogance was slipping away, replaced by a glimmer of fear. Fear that, for the first time in their lives, they had encountered someone they couldn't intimidate. "What's the matter, old man?" the leader sneered, but there was a tremor in his voice now. "You think your biker friends are gonna save you?" The veteran didn't respond. His silence was more powerful than any words he could have spoken. He could feel his pulse steady, his breath even. He was ready, not just physically but mentally. He had faced down enemies far worse than these boys. He wasn't going to let them get the best of him. He took a step forward, closing the gap between himself and the leader. The others hesitated, shifting nervously behind their friend. The veteran's gaze never wavered. The leader faltered. "You're a fool if you think we're just going to let you walk away." But before the veteran could speak, the distant sound of roaring engines echoed through the park. The young men froze. They looked at each other in confusion. The veteran's lips curled into a small smile. He knew exactly what that sound meant. The leader whipped around, eyes searching for the source of the noise. The engines grew louder, the rumbling sound shaking the air. The veteran's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to check it, he knew his friends were already on their way. The roar of motorcycles filled the park as 3 massive bikes came into view, barreling down the path toward them. Dust kicked up in their wake as the bikes slowed and came to a stop just yards away from the group. The veterans' biker brothers were here. There was no mistaking them. They were as big and intimidating as the bikes they rode. Each man was built like a tank, covered in leather, tattoos, and a sense of unshakable confidence that came from years of shared experience. They were veterans in their own right, some of them had fought in wars, others had served in law enforcement, and all of them had one thing in common: they knew how to handle themselves in any situation. The leader of the group of young men turned white as he looked at the bikers. He took a step back, his bravado crumbling. The veterans' friends dismounted their bikes, the sounds of their boots hitting the ground echoing through the park. They were calm, composed, and not at all like the chaotic, angry boys they were about to confront. "Hey, old man," one of the bikers, a tall man with a thick beard, called to the veteran. "You need some help?" The veteran nodded slightly, not taking his eyes off the group of young men. He could feel the tension in the air. The young men were no longer laughing. They were no longer confident. They were scared. The veteran knew that fear, he had seen it in the eyes of soldiers who faced certain death. "Get lost," one of the young men muttered, trying to sound tough. His voice cracked. "We don't want any trouble. We were just messing with him." The tall biker with the beard took a step forward, his boots thudding heavily on the ground. "You don't mess with our brothers. You don't mess with anyone like that. Not today." The leader tried to rally his group, but his voice shook. "This isn't over. You're just a bunch of old men with nothing better to do." The veteran stepped in front of his friends, cutting off the leader's words. His voice was steady, commanding. "You picked the wrong fight. You don't get to mess with people like that and walk away unscathed. You came here, to my turf, and you picked a fight you can't win." The young men stood frozen, their mouths open but no words coming out. The veteran could see the wheels turning in their minds as they realized just how deeply they had underestimated the situation. The tall biker stepped forward, his hand resting casually on the handle of a worn leather jacket. He didn't need to say anything else. His presence alone was enough to make the young men reconsider their actions. "We're not going to hurt you," the biker said, his voice quiet but firm. "But we're going to make sure you leave here with the lesson you should have learned a long time ago." The leader swallowed hard. He turned to his friends, trying to muster the courage to stand his ground, but the fear was unmistakable in his eyes. "Let's go," he muttered. "Let's get out of here." One by one, the young men began to back away, retreating as they glanced nervously at the veteran and his biker friends. The leader, still fuming with anger and humiliation, cast one last look at the veteran before turning on his heel and storming off. As the group of young men disappeared into the distance, the tension in the air seemed to evaporate. The veteran stood tall, his body sore but his spirit unbroken. He turned to his friends, his biker brothers, who were now smiling with approval. "You handled that well, old man," one of the bikers said with a grin. "I didn't think they'd back down so quickly." The veteran gave a small, knowing smile. "They never do. They just don't know when they've crossed the line." The other bikers laughed, clapping him on the back. They knew the veteran's resolve. They had seen him in action countless times, and they respected him for it. His calm demeanor had always been a strength, even when faced with overwhelming odds. But the veteran wasn't thinking about the confrontation anymore. He was thinking about something else. Something that had been gnawing at him ever since the young men had first approached him. "Do you think this was just a random encounter?" the veteran asked, his voice low and serious. The tall biker with the beard raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The veteran's eyes darkened as he stared at the path the young men had taken. "I don't know. But something feels off. They weren't just looking to mess with an old man. They were looking for something. And I think we've only seen the beginning." The night had fallen, casting long shadows over the park. The streetlights flickered as the last remnants of daylight disappeared. The veteran, along with his biker brothers, stood in the midst of the quiet park, still processing what had just happened. It was an odd feeling, the kind you get when you know something important has just occurred, but you're not sure what it is yet. Something about the young men's behavior didn't sit right with him. They hadn't just been random punks looking for a fight. No, there was something deeper going on. "Let's head back to the clubhouse," the tall biker with the beard, Mark, said, breaking the silence. "We can have a drink, clear our heads." The veteran nodded but didn't move immediately. His mind was still whirling. He couldn't shake the feeling that those kids hadn't just stumbled across him. He didn't believe in coincidences, not after everything he'd been through. "Yeah, let's go," he finally muttered, turning towards the motorcycles. But his steps were slower than usual. His gaze was focused on the path where the young men had disappeared, his thoughts 100 miles away. As they revved their engines and headed towards the clubhouse, the veteran remained quiet. The night air whipped past him as they sped down the winding roads. He tried to push the nagging feeling away, but it wouldn't leave him. His mind was still on the confrontation. The way they had hesitated before attacking him, the way the leader had tried to act tough but quickly faltered, it wasn't typical of a random street fight. As they reached the clubhouse, the veteran's friends dismounted their bikes, some chatting, some heading inside for a drink, but he remained outside. He needed space to think. "Hey, you all right?" Mark called out, noticing the veteran standing apart from the group. The veteran turned slowly and nodded. "Yeah, just need a minute." Mark gave him a knowing look. He knew the veteran well enough to understand when something was eating at him. He didn't press the issue, though, and walked inside, leaving the veteran alone under the pale glow of the street lamp. The veteran's eyes drifted back to the path leading through the park. Something about it still bothered him. Why had those boys come for him? Why had they targeted him specifically? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting to see a message from one of the guys inside the clubhouse, maybe just checking on him. But instead, it was a message from an unknown number. "I saw what happened today. You're in danger. Be careful." The message sent a chill down the veteran's spine. His fingers hovered over the screen, unsure how to respond. Who could this be? And why were they reaching out to him? Before he could think it through, the phone buzzed again. "They know who you are. They've been watching you." His heart rate quickened. Who the hell was this? The message seemed to be referring to the same young men who had harassed him earlier. But how could they know anything about him? He was just an old man, an ex-soldier. What kind of threat could he possibly pose? The veteran quickly typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly, "Doesn't matter. You'll figure it out soon enough. Watch your back." That was it. No more messages followed. The veteran stood there, holding the phone in his hand, staring at the screen. The words ran through his mind, "They've been watching you." His mind raced. Who was watching him? And why? The young men had no idea who he was, not really. They had called him an old man, a fool, and tried to scare him. But they hadn't known the first thing about him, what he had done, who he had been. It didn't make sense. He slid the phone back into his pocket and started walking towards the clubhouse, his steps heavy with thought. As he reached the door, Mark appeared in the doorway, his face serious. "You okay?" Mark asked again, his voice low. The veteran nodded. "Yeah. Just need a drink." Mark gave him a small smile. "Come on in then. We got a bottle of whiskey with your name on it." The veteran walked inside, but his mind wasn't there. It was still racing over the messages, trying to connect the dots. He sat down at the bar, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and stared into the amber liquid. The rest of the guys were talking and laughing, but the veteran was lost in thought. Every now and then, he'd glance around the room, scanning faces, searching for anything out of place. But everything seemed normal. His brothers were all accounted for. The bartender, a grizzled man who had seen more than his fair share of trouble, slid a bottle of whiskey towards the veteran. "You look like you need more than just one," he said with a grin. "Maybe," the veteran replied, lifting his glass. He drank in silence, the alcohol warming his throat, but it did nothing to quell the anxiety gnawing at his insides. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. As the night wore on, the others grew more relaxed, but the veteran remained tense. He had been through too many dangerous situations in his life not to trust his instincts. And right now, his instincts were screaming at him. Finally, after what felt like hours, he stood up, pushing the chair back with a loud scrape. "I'm going out for a bit," he said, his voice rough. Mark looked up, concern flashing in his eyes. "You sure? You've had a lot to drink." The veteran nodded, his expression grim. "I'm fine. I just need to clear my head." Without waiting for a response, he walked out the door and into the cool night air. His steps were deliberate as he made his way back to the park. He had to figure this out. He couldn't ignore the messages. He couldn't just forget about the young men and the strange behavior they had shown. As he walked down the path through the park, he noticed something out of place. The area was dark, but he could see the faint outline of a figure standing near the edge of the trees. His heart skipped a beat. Was it one of the young men? Or was it someone else? He quickened his pace, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he kept tucked in his jacket. The figure didn't move. As he drew closer, he could see more clearly. It was a man, older than the young punks he had encountered earlier. But there was something about him that made the veteran's skin crawl. The man was standing perfectly still, his back to the veteran, as if he were waiting for him. The veteran hesitated for a moment, then called out. "Hey!" The figure didn't respond. The veteran's instincts kicked in, and he closed the gap between them quickly. As he got within arm's reach, the man suddenly turned. The veteran froze. The man's face was unfamiliar, but there was something oddly recognizable about him. His eyes were cold, calculating. And for a brief second, the veteran felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Something was terribly wrong. "I was hoping you'd show up," the man said in a voice that sounded both familiar and strange at the same time. The veteran's mind raced. Who was this man? How did he know about him? "Who are you?" the veteran demanded, his voice hard. The man smiled slowly. "You'll find out soon enough." Then, without warning, he turned and vanished into the darkness, disappearing like a shadow. The veteran stood there, frozen. His mind was reeling, his body tense with a mixture of fear and confusion. He had no idea who this man was, or what his intentions were, but one thing was certain, he was tied to the mystery, and things were about to get much worse. The next day, the veteran couldn't shake off the eerie feeling from the night before. The encounter with the strange man in the park haunted him. His mind kept replaying that moment, the man's cold, calculated smile, the way he seemed to know exactly what the veteran was thinking. It wasn't just a random occurrence. There was something deeper going on, something far bigger than any street fight or petty harassment. He woke up early, still exhausted from the whiskey and the emotional turmoil. But he couldn't rest. He had to find out more. Who was that man? Why had he appeared out of nowhere and made those cryptic statements? And why did he seem to know so much about the veteran? The veteran dressed quickly, pulling on a worn leather jacket that still carried the faint smell of the road. He'd lived his life on the edge, facing dangers that most people couldn't even imagine. But this was different. This wasn't a fight he could win with strength alone. He grabbed his phone, checking for any new messages. To his surprise, there was another text from the unknown number. His heart skipped a beat. "They're closing in on you. You won't be safe much longer." The message was short, but it was enough to send a wave of cold dread through his chest. Who was this person, and how did they know what had happened in the park? Were they watching him? The veteran quickly dialed Mark's number, his fingers shaking slightly. He needed answers. He needed to know what was going on. "Hey, it's me," Mark answered on the second ring, his voice gruff. "What's up?" "I need your help," the veteran said, his voice tight with urgency. "We've got a serious problem." Mark fell silent for a moment, then sighed. "What happened? Is it about those punks from the park?" The veteran nodded, even though Mark couldn't see him. "Yeah. It's worse than I thought. Someone's been watching me. They sent me another message, and it doesn't feel like a coincidence anymore." "All right," Mark said, his tone shifting to one of concern. "Where are you?" "I'll meet you there," Mark replied. "Be careful, man. This sounds way bigger than just some kids messing around." The veteran hung up the phone, his mind racing. It wasn't just some kids. It was something else entirely, something that tied into a much darker web of intrigue. But what? As he made his way to the park, the morning sun had risen, casting a golden glow over the path where he had encountered the strange man. The air was thick with the scent of fresh grass and damp earth, but the peaceful surroundings didn't match the turmoil brewing inside him. He arrived at the park's entrance and parked his motorcycle near the same spot where the incident had occurred. There was still no sign of the young men who had harassed him, but he wasn't expecting them. He was looking for answers, not confrontation. He took a deep breath and started walking down the same path, his boots crunching against the gravel. The park seemed unusually quiet. There were a few joggers in the distance, a couple of parents pushing strollers, but nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the veteran couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His senses were on high alert, his every step carefully calculated. As he reached the spot where he had first seen the man, he paused. Something felt different about this place now, as if the entire park had become an extension of the mystery that surrounded him. He scanned the area carefully, looking for anything that might give him a clue. Just as he was about to turn and walk away, a movement caught his eye. Near the edge of the trees, he saw a figure step into view. It was a man, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. The veteran's heart raced, but this time, he didn't freeze in fear. He had learned to trust his instincts, and they told him this man wasn't a stranger. The figure slowly approached, his face partially obscured by the shadow of the trees. As he drew closer, the veteran's pulse quickened. It was the same man from last night. The man who had disappeared into the darkness without a trace. This time, the veteran didn't wait. He took a step forward and called out. "You," he said, his voice low but steady. "Who are you?" The man stopped, tilting his head slightly as if considering the question. Then, with an almost amused smirk, he replied, "I think you already know the answer to that." The veteran's fists clenched. What do you want from me? The man's expression grew serious. I don't want anything from you. But you're about to learn something important. Something that will change everything you thought you knew. The veteran's mind raced. What was this man talking about? Change everything? He wasn't sure if he wanted to hear it. But the man seemed to know something that the veteran didn't. Just tell me what the hell is going on, the veteran demanded, his patience running thin. The man took a step closer, lowering his voice. There's a group of people who have been watching you for a long time. They know who you are, what you've done, and they're preparing to make their move. You're part of something much bigger than you realize. The veteran's heart skipped a beat. Who are they? What do they want with me? The man's lips curled into a grin. That's the question, isn't it? And the answer will reveal itself soon enough. But for now, you need to be careful. They won't stop until they have what they want. Before the veteran could ask another question, the man turned and started walking away, fading into the trees once again. Wait, the veteran shouted, but the man didn't respond. Frustrated and confused, the veteran stood there, his thoughts racing. A group of people had been watching him for a long time. What did they want with him? And who the hell was that man? His phone buzzed again, breaking his thoughts. He pulled it out, his hands trembling. It was another message from the unknown number. You're not alone. Don't trust anyone. They're closer than you think. A sense of dread washed over him. Whoever this was, whatever this was, it wasn't a coincidence. The walls were closing in. He couldn't run from this anymore. Mark's voice broke through the silence, his call ringing through the phone. Hey, I'm here. Where are you? The veteran didn't hesitate. I'm at the park. We need to talk. I think we're in deeper than we thought. As he made his way back to the entrance, the weight of the situation settled over him like a thick fog. Whatever was coming next, it wouldn't be easy to face. But he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when there were so many unanswered questions. The weight of the situation hung over the veteran like a dark cloud, pressing down with an unbearable heaviness. His body still ached from the tension of the past few days, but it was his mind that was suffering the most. The pieces weren't fitting together. Every lead seemed to circle back on itself, offering only more confusion and dread. He met Mark at the entrance of the park, just as they had planned. Mark's old pickup truck sat parked by the curb, and the veteran immediately noticed the wary look on his friend's face. Are you all right? Mark asked, stepping out of the truck and scanning their surroundings. His tone was thick with concern, but there was also a trace of disbelief in his voice. I'm fine, the veteran replied, though the words felt hollow as soon as he said them. But I'm not sure I believe that anymore. Mark raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? I've been getting these messages, the veteran said, pulling out his phone and showing Mark the last text he received. You're not alone. Don't trust anyone. They're closer than you think. Mark studied the screen, his eyes narrowing. This is getting out of hand. It's not just some prank or coincidence. Someone's messing with you, seriously. I think it's bigger than that, the veteran said. His voice low. I don't know what they want, but it's clear that they've been watching me for a while. And that man, the one from the park, he said something that stuck with me. Mark looked at him, waiting for him to continue. He said I'm part of something bigger, the veteran continued. That there's a group who's been watching me for years. I don't know why or how, but they know who I am. They know everything about me. Mark's eyes widened. What do you mean, everything about you? The veteran hesitated, unsure whether he should share everything he knew. The words were heavy on his tongue, but he felt like he had no choice. I don't know how they know, but they even know things about my past. Stuff that only a few people would know. Things I've never told anyone. I don't know who they are or why they're doing this, but it's not just some random threat. Mark shook his head. So what do we do now? Are we just waiting for them to make their move? The veteran looked out over the park, a deep sense of unease washing over him. I don't know. But I'm not going to wait around and find out. I'm going to take the fight to them. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but the veteran cut him off. We need to find out who's behind this. We can't let them control the narrative. We've got to be one step ahead. Mark looked uncertain, but after a moment, he nodded. All right, I'm with you. But we have to be careful. Whoever these people are, they're dangerous. And we don't know how far they'll go to get what they want. I know, the veteran replied, clenching his fists. But I'm not going down without a fight. They walked toward the center of the park, where the veteran had seen the mysterious man earlier. The air was thick with tension, and every step they took felt heavier than the last. The park that once seemed like a place of peace now felt like a battleground, a place where something dark and dangerous was waiting just beneath the surface. The veteran glanced at Mark. We need to find out who's behind this. Who is watching me? And why? Mark nodded. We need to dig deeper. But I think it's time we get some help. The veteran frowned. Help? From who? Mark looked at him, his eyes serious. There's someone I know. A private investigator. He's good at digging up information. Maybe he can find something we missed. The veteran wasn't sure what to think. A private investigator could help them, but it also meant they'd be involving someone else in their mess. Someone else who could get hurt. But at this point, they didn't have many options. All right, he said after a moment. But we need to move fast. We can't afford to wait around anymore. Mark pulled out his phone and made a quick call. He didn't say much, but when he hung up, his expression was grim. He'll meet us at my place in an hour, Mark said. We'll talk strategy and get him on the trail. The veteran nodded, but something still nagged at the back of his mind. The feeling that they were being watched had only grown stronger, and every corner of the park seemed to hold more mystery than before. What was it that the mysterious group wanted with him? And why had they been watching him for so long without making a move? As they walked back to the truck, the veteran's phone buzzed again, sending a shockwave of tension through him. Another message from the unknown number. You're running out of time. They're closing in. The game's almost over. The words sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't just a warning anymore, it was a countdown. Whoever was behind this, they were making their move, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. When they arrived at Mark's place, they were greeted by a man in his mid-40s, wearing a dark suit and sunglasses. He didn't say much at first, just gave them a curt nod as Mark introduced him. This is Tony, Mark said. He's the one who's going to help us figure this out. Tony didn't waste any time. I've been briefed. Let's get down to it. What are we dealing with? The veteran took a deep breath. I've been getting these cryptic messages. Someone's been watching me for a while, and it feels like they're about to make a move. I need to know who's behind it. Tony's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened as he listened. All right, I'll get started on it. But you two need to stay out of the way. If these people are as dangerous as you say, it's better to let me handle it. The veteran shook his head. No. We're not staying out of it. This involves me, and I'm going to see it through. Tony didn't argue. Fine. But remember, this isn't a game. We're dealing with people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Tony made a series of calls, tracking down leads and searching through databases, while the veteran and Mark sat in the small living room, watching the news and trying to stay calm. The tension in the air was palpable, and every minute felt like an eternity. Finally, around midnight, Tony returned. His face was grim. "I found something," he said, sitting down across from the veteran. "There's a group. They're known for getting into people's lives, manipulating them, and getting what they want by any means necessary. They've been operating under the radar for years. And from what I've gathered, they've had their eye on you for a long time." The veteran's blood ran cold. "Why me? What do they want?" Tony shook his head. "That's the part I'm still trying to figure out. But it's clear that they won't stop until they get what they're after." A heavy silence settled over the room as the veteran processed what Tony had just said. The sense of danger was no longer a vague fear, it was real. The enemy was out there, closing in, and there was no way to know how far they were willing to go. But one thing was certain, this was just the beginning. The night felt colder than usual, even with the heater on full blast. The veteran sat in the dimly lit living room, his mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything had escalated far beyond his understanding. His past was catching up with him, and he couldn't outrun it anymore. He glanced at Mark, who sat across from him, his expression tight with worry. Mark had been a close friend for years, but even he looked like he didn't know what to say. The world they had known seemed to be falling apart. The veteran had always believed he had seen it all, but now, nothing felt certain. There were too many unanswered questions. Who were these people watching him? Why had they been so persistent? What did they want from him? The phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence, making both men jump. The veteran snatched it up before it could ring again. "Hello?" he answered, his voice rough from the tension. "This is Tony," came the voice on the other end. "We've got a problem." The veteran's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of problem?" "It's the group," Tony said quickly. "They've moved faster than I expected. I've traced their movements, and they're already on the move. They know we're looking for them. It's no longer just about you. It's about stopping anyone who tries to uncover their plans." The veteran's blood ran cold. He had known this day was coming, but the reality of it hit him harder than expected. "What are we dealing with? Who are they?" Tony didn't hesitate. "I've got a lead. A person. Someone close to the group who might be able to shed some light on who they are. I need to meet them. But we need to be careful. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their secrets." The veteran's mind spun as he processed Tony's words. "Where do we meet?" "At the old train station, near the docks. Be there in an hour." Before he could respond, Tony hung up, leaving the veteran staring at the phone in his hand. The gravity of the situation was overwhelming. He had come face to face with danger before, but this was something different. These people weren't just out for money or power, they were after something much more elusive, something that seemed to involve him directly. He glanced at Mark. "We need to move. Tony's got a lead." Mark stood up, his face tight with resolve. "We're in this together. Let's go." They both grabbed their jackets and headed for the door. The chill in the air seemed to grow colder with each passing minute. The night felt oppressive, as though it knew something they didn't. Every step they took felt like it could be their last. The drive to the docks was silent. Neither man spoke, each lost in their own thoughts. The city lights flickered as they passed, casting long shadows across the empty streets. It was nearly midnight, and the streets were deserted, except for the occasional car and the distant hum of the city's heartbeat. Turning back now. When they reached the station, Tony was already there, standing near the entrance, his eyes scanning the area. He looked tense, his posture rigid as if expecting an attack at any moment. The veteran and Mark approached cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the damp pavement. "Tony," the veteran said, his voice low. "What's the plan?" Tony glanced around before answering. We need to get inside. There's a woman who knows everything. She's been part of this group, but she wants out. She's scared, and she's the only one who can give us the answers we need. The veteran nodded. Where is she? Inside, Tony said, pointing toward the dimly lit building. We don't have much time. They'll be looking for her soon, and when they do, it won't be pretty. The veteran and Mark exchanged a look. There was no going back. If they were going to get to the truth, they had to trust Tony. And more than that, they had to face whatever was waiting for them inside the station. As they entered the building, the sound of their footsteps echoed through the hollow space. The smell of rust and old concrete filled the air, adding to the sense of foreboding that hung over them. Tony led the way, his steps purposeful and quick. The veteran's heart was pounding in his chest, but he couldn't let fear take hold. Not now. They reached a small office at the back of the building. Tony knocked twice on the door before pushing it open. Inside sat a woman, her back to them. She was older than the veteran had expected, her hair streaked with gray, but there was something about her eyes that made him uneasy. They were cold, calculating, but they also held a deep sadness. She turned to face them as they entered, her expression guarded but not unfriendly. This is her, Tony said, stepping aside. The woman didn't speak immediately. Instead, she studied the veteran and Mark, sizing them up. After a long pause, she finally spoke. You're the veteran, she said, her voice soft but firm. I've been waiting for you. The veteran raised an eyebrow. Waiting for me? She nodded slowly. I know what they want. I know who you are. But I'm not sure if you're ready to hear the truth. The veteran's pulse quickened. Tell me what you know. I don't have time for games. She took a deep breath, then looked directly at him. You've been part of this group's plans for longer than you realize. They've been watching you for years, but not just as a target. You're something much more significant to them. Mark's confusion mirrored the veteran's. What do you mean? The group has been building something, she continued. A network of people with skills, connections, and backgrounds that make them invaluable. They don't just want power. They want control over the most powerful people in the world. And you've been a key part of their plan. Whether you knew it or not. The veteran felt a knot tighten in his stomach. I don't understand. Why me? The woman looked at him with pity. You were part of their plan because of your past. They needed someone with military experience, someone who could navigate the underworld and understand how to manipulate people. Your history makes you the perfect pawn in their game. The words hit like a punch to the gut. The veteran had always thought of himself as just a soldier, someone who had done his duty and moved on. But now, it seemed like his past had been more than just a series of events. It had been a blueprint, a tool in someone else's hands. I didn't ask for this, he muttered, feeling the weight of it all crashing down on him. The woman nodded. I know. But now, you have a choice. You can help us bring this group down, or you can walk away and let them destroy everything. The veteran looked at Mark, then at Tony. The choice was his to make. There was no turning back, no easy way out. The group had been in the shadows for too long, and now they were coming for him. But for the first time, the veteran didn't feel alone in this fight. He had allies. People who were willing to stand with him. I'm in, he said, his voice steady. The woman nodded. Then let's finish this.